open it as a public building. So with that said, the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site was donated by the Taylor family in 2003 to the state of New Mexico. They donated their home, 2 attached storefronts, and the wonderful collection inside it to the state of New Mexico. This was a long process. It involved a legal donation agreement. It also involved a legislative designation of it as a historic site. And again, like I said, we'll be introducing the Taylor family and Paul and Mary at a later date in the series, but I do want to just give you a quick introduction to who they are. Mary Daniels Taylor was born in 1922 in El Paso. Her father was the foreman of the cement plant. She was a photographer, historian, archivist, writer. She did a lot of work in bringing documentation from Mexico, primary documentation, into New Mexico, particularly to the New Mexico State University archives. She's got her own collection there, which has been incredibly valuable to historians throughout the last couple of decades. She was also a very well-known photographer and took thousands of photographs of Mesilla and people of the Mesilla Valley through her studio and darkroom, which was located in the Barella store, which is a part of what's going to be an historic site. I'll show you a picture of that in a little while. Dennis Daly, who I mentioned earlier, he speculates that there's somewhere between 25 and 35,000 photographs that she took that have been donated to the university, which is pretty phenomenal. She also literally wrote the book on Mesilla. It's called A Place as Wild as the West Ever Was, and she passed away in 2007. J. Paul Taylor was born in 1920 in San Marino, New Mexico. He was a registrar with New Mexico State University and then later became a teacher, principal, and associate superintendent with the Las Cruces Public School System. He, after retiring from the Las Cruces Public School System, he became a representative with the state legislature, representing District 33, which covers Mesilla, Mesilla Park, and the University Park area. He served for 18 years, where he was very involved in bilingual education, programs for indigent New Mexicans, as well as the arts and culture. He passed away in 2023. So the home they gifted is filled with just incredible art, just like this. It's also got incredible architecture in the home. Again, that will come this winter. A detailed talk about that. But their home, the basic, at its core idea behind the donation of the home is to use the architecture and the collection within the home to teach about the history of Mesilla, Mesilla Valley, the Southwest, borderland regions, and southern New Mexico. And particularly then with the donation of what is essentially a family home through the lens of a New Mexican family. So with that said, the town of Mesilla, the one that we recognize today, was founded in about 1848. And this is actually a really key important factor that I want everybody to understand as we talk about why this historic site got elevated to a historic site and why it's so amazing. Mesilla is relatively young compared to some of the other communities in New Mexico, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Taos. But Mesilla sat witness to a lot of really key important 19th century moments that make up how New Mexico became the New Mexico that we have today. I think a lot of us can agree that southern New Mexico gets ignored sometimes in the history of New Mexico. We kind of get forgotten about, and this provides a really fantastic opportunity for us to flip that narrative on its head a little bit and showcase just how important southern New Mexico is to the history of New Mexico as a whole. So our story, as we're going to begin it as far as the history goes, begins with the end of the Mexican-American War. This war was fought from 1846 to 1848, and in 1848, the two nations signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty essentially ceded a massive swath of southwestern land, what is now southwestern land, but at the time was the northern frontier of Mexico, to the United States. This treaty, you can see all of the land here that was ceded with that. I do want to point out the eastern part of what is now New Mexico was a part of a disputed Texas territory, so that's why you don't see it highlighted on this map. But the immediate boundary line between the two nations that was sort of designated with this treaty was in fact the Rio Grande River. The problem with having a river as your international border is that it does its own thing. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon, and doesn't really work when it's a river. So there was a joint border commission that was installed with both the Mexican government and the American government that was going to determine where this border was. The problem, though, was that the U.S. really wanted the very southern tip of Arizona and New Mexico. So this is going to become a bit of an issue for the two nations. In that Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, though, there was a stipulation that stated that any new American citizen in these territories who had no interest in being a part of this new nation, they could repatriate back across the border and back into Mexico. Father Ramon Ortiz, this is actually a painting of him that is on display in the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site. He was given special dispensation in order to repatriate citizens across the border into Mexico and to give out land grants. Again, the border at the time was the Rio Grande River. Now today the river is located this direction from where we are. At this time period that we're talking about, the river was located over here. And so this is why Mesilla was founded, because again, it was just on the other side of the border in Mexico, which meant that residents from Doniana, residents from San Elizario, El Paso, Socorro, they could come across the river and be in Mexico, and they could found a new town over here. So that's why Mesilla ultimately became founded. Ramon Ortiz, thus, is sometimes considered to be a founder of Mesilla. Again, this is a huge political problem, though. Americans really want to be able to get to California by way of a southern access road. And so they want the southern portion of New Mexico and Arizona. So even though the war is over, the war is not really over for the next 6 years as the war continues in political diplomat offices as the two nations fight over this land. This leaves Mesilla in a bit of a geographic no man's land where they don't quite know where they're going to end up. The United States, they send in a diplomatic emissary named James Gadsden, and his job is to fix the problem. What he does is he goes to the Mexican president, Santa Anna, who is in a lot of debt, and says, you can sell us the land. We'll give you money that you desperately need, and then we get the land that we want, and everybody's happy. And Santa Anna is all for this plan. So Santa Anna and the United States government, they agree to a deal where Mexico sells the United States the land for $10 million. And then on December 30th, 1853, in Mexico City, the Gadsden Purchase is signed. It will not be ratified by the U.S. Congress until April of 1854. And then in November of 1854, soldiers from Fort Fillmore come onto the Mesilla Plaza, and they formalize this treaty. They change the flag from Mexican to American, and now all of those Mesilleros who crossed the river in an effort to not be in the United States are once again in the United States. This is why colloquially this is sometimes referred to as the Treaty of Mesilla. Throughout the 1850s, Mesilla is the largest community between San Antonio, Texas, and San Diego, California, which is pretty remarkable given the fact that there's only about 2,500 people living in town, and that tells you just how sparse the population of southern New Mexico is during the 1850s. That said, because it is the largest community, it is a really significant transportation and commercial center for southern New Mexico. Sorry, I keep coming back here because my notes are on the screen. The entire valley was prospering quite significantly. But again, because California is such a singularly important part of the United States, and a lot of these decisions that are made during the 1840s are to service California, which again is where all the gold is, the United States needs an overland mail route. Up to the 1850s, in order to get from the United States, from Missouri essentially to California, you had to go down the Mississippi River, down the Gulf of Mexico, across the Isthmus of Panama, and then come up into San Diego and San Francisco. Californians are done with how long that takes to get there, and so they demand an overland mail route. The The U.S. Postal Service puts out a request for proposals, essentially, and the proposal ultimately goes to a man named James Butterfield. But it's going to take him a while to get his overland mail route set up. And so in the meantime, a much shorter overland route is set up, which is the San Antonio-San Diego. That's the one that you see right over here. And it does, in fact, go through Mesilla. This really makes Mesilla a link from the United States to California, from Missouri to California. This really goes to highlight just how singularly vital Mesilla is to southern New Mexico and to the Southwest during this time period, because it's a major stop on this transportation route. A year later, the Butterfield begins its process and it supersedes the San Antonio-San Diego mail line. But basically what they do is they sublet the San Antonio-San Diego portion to that company, so they continue to operate within the umbrella of the Butterfield. This is a very important period of Southwestern history here in the United States, but it's a very, very short period. It's a very compressed time period. This begins about 1857, and this completely ends with the Civil War. Now, during this time period, much of southern New Mexico and West Texas was actually very sympathetic to the Confederacy. So in 1861, when the Confederacy comes into New Mexico with the first Battle of Mesilla, they actually do very easily take control of both New Mexico and Arizona. And Mesilla becomes the Confederate capital of the territory of Arizona. This lasts for only about a year, and the Confederacy is kicked out of New Mexico with the Battle of Glorieta Pass just north of Santa Fe. And for the rest of the war, Mesilla is essentially a supply stop and a depot for the Union Army. The war ends in 1865, but that does not end the religious and political differences that are going on within this community. About a decade or so later, in 1871, things come to a very severe head. There is, in this time period, because New Mexico is just a territory, there is a delegate that is sent to Congress for New Mexico. They don't have any voting power. And 1871 happens to be an election year. They are electing their non-voting delegate to go to Congress. There is on August 25th, 1871, there is a rally happening on the Mesilla Plaza for the Democrat nominee. There is also a rally happening for the Republican nominee. And I like to say, politics has not changed in 250 years here in New Mexico. It just hasn't, or in the United States as a whole. But this leads to an actual riot, where by the end of the day, at least 7 people are killed, 35 are injured, and they say that over 500 bullets are fired across the plaza. This results in a massive schism of the entire Mesilla Valley. You end up having 500 members of Mesilla and of communities to the south, like La Mesa and Chambarino. They decide, we're not doing this anymore, we're going back to Mexico. And so they travel back across the border and they settle in the community of La Ascension in the state of Chihuahua. Now this is kind of amazing, actually. I just found out about it this week. There's some research that's taking place by a student researcher here at NMSU, and he is actually doing some research on the people movement between La Ascension and Mesilla. So hopefully someday in the future we can bring him here to be able to share some of his research and to be able to talk about what that means, because we were able to see earlier this week at the archive some photographs, and there's actually in the town of Ascension, there's a plaque that states that this town was founded by members of the community of Mesilla who came into Mexico in 1872. It's quite amazing, actually. In 1881, the railroad comes into southern New Mexico, and the railroad bypasses Mesilla in its entirety and takes and puts the line through the community of Las Cruces. This is because the railroad wanted the land for free. Mesilla was unwilling to give that land for free. Las Cruces was like, we'll do it happily. And so Las Cruces ultimately supersedes Mesilla as the commercial importance because it has this big transportation hub in it. In 1885, the county seat for Doña Ana is shifted from Mesilla to Las Cruces, and at that point, Las Cruces really takes over as the population center for this area. But there's an argument to be made that this kind of was really great, because what this meant is that Mesilla was able to keep its kind of 19th century character. This Mesilla Plaza that we see today is still incredibly tied to its Mexican founding. And I'm not sure if that would have been able to happen had Mesilla remained that sort of commercial and transportation center. By the time we reach the 20th century and the 1950s, the town is beginning to incorporate itself, and it's really beginning to invest in rehabilitating a lot of the buildings on the plaza. They get a public works investment grant. This is where the brick sidewalks that we see today come from. This is where the brand new bandstand to replace the one built in the 30s comes from. New trees are planted. These turn-of-the-century light posts are put in. All of these things come as the community begins to really make this shift towards rehab and protecting and preserving its 19th century plaza. All right, so now that we've talked about the town, let's talk about the people at the historic site. So we're going to start with the Barella family. This is one of the buildings that will constitute the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site, and we're going to call this the Barella store. The Barellas came to Mesilla about 1857 out of Los Ranchos de Albuquerque. They settled here in this home. They had a storefront. This was actually their storefront. They lived behind the plaza, and they were very successful. By the 1860 census, Anastasio Barella, the patriarch of his family, his wealth is listed at $30,000. So they did pretty well in town. His wife, Rafaela, she is also very involved in the community. Their son, Mariano, he becomes a county sheriff, and he's also a tax collector. Anastasio, though, he is a Confederate sympathizer. And so when the Confederacy flees New Mexico in 1863, he goes with them. But he does something very interesting before he goes, and that is that he signs over the deeds to his properties to Rafaela. And Rafaela becomes the owner of this building. And she becomes the owner of the building for the next 40 years. She is actually a really important matriarch in Mesilla. In a time period where women aren't normally owning property like this, she is owning it for several decades. The same year that Anastasio Barella fled New Mexico, James Edgar Griggs and Joseph Reynolds come into Mesilla, and they open the Mesilla chapter of the Reynolds and Griggs Company. I only have a photograph today of Joseph Reynolds. He was born in 1825. He enters into Mesilla in the 1850s. His partner, J. Edgar Griggs, born in 1836, also comes into New Mexico in the 1850s. These gentlemen meet because they're civilian employees of the U.S. Army. And they have a massive mercantile empire across southern New Mexico. And in 1863, they decide that they're going to add Mesilla to their list of holdings, and they open a building here on the Mesilla Plaza. Now, their partnership, it falls apart in early 1877, and only about 7 months later, J. Edgar Griggs, he passes away. But because their partnership fell apart, Joseph Reynolds wasn't involved in the day-to-day operation of the storefront by the time J. Edgar Griggs died. So this is actually a very cool photograph of an old newspaper here in Mesilla from 1877. I know it's really hard to see what's on there. It's super blurry, and I apologize. But what you can see right here is it shows J. Edgar Griggs, jobber and retailer. And so you don't actually see Reynolds' name on the storefront by the time of J. Edgar Griggs' death. I don't know why their relationship fell apart, and I don't know why the Reynolds family was not involved in the day-to-day operations of this business. By the time J. Edgar Griggs dies, his wife is really the one running it, but what she does is she leases it to a number of different proprietors. One of these is L.H. Baldy. He pops up in newspapers all the time. And there's actually a note in this, which I think is really fantastic, that states, and this right here, you can't really see it, but it states that the storefront sells 200 dozen hats. I love that, because mathematically speaking, that's one hat for everyone in town. Again, I don't know why these two fell apart. I don't know what really happened. The story of this building between 1880 and 1900 remains quite a mystery. This is one that we're going to have to really dig into and pull apart and understand as a part of the historic site. We are working on that in very close proximity with members of the Reynolds family. So this is hopefully going to be a story that I can fill in for you later. When Joseph Reynolds died, he died without a will. And now Doñana County Probate Court, they did give a certain amount of money to each of Joseph Reynolds' kids, but again, this did not include what was a part of the store and the business. And so if any of Joseph Reynolds' kids wanted to have a part in their parents' storefront, they needed to actively take steps to take over that property, which is exactly what Charles Reynolds did. Charles Reynolds was born in 1869. He was educated at both Notre Dame and Georgetown University, and he comes back to New Mexico in 1891 and decides that he wants to reopen up his father's mercantile empire. And so he buys up the property from the Griggs family, but he also buys the property from Rafaela Varela. And it is at this point that these properties become completely united as one property. He is also the one responsible for the reason why the facades of these buildings look like they do. He instituted a massive revival project on these facades, including the building that you see right there. This is from when Heart of the Desert was in that storefront. But this is what we are going to refer to as the Reynolds store. He is responsible for the look of this building. It is an adobe building, and this wood and tin building, or wood and tin facade, does sit on top of the adobe building. He probably ordered this off a catalog and had it shipped in via railroad. And I just have to say, the farther into the future we get, the harder it is to explain what a catalog is. Charles Reynolds had a few bad years of business. He was said to be a soft-hearted businessman who gave way too much credit to his customers. And he spent a lot of money on this renovation. And so he had to take out a loan from the parish priest, Father Grange, but unfortunately his business never recuperated. And then sadly his young wife, Tilly, died. And so Father Grange had to foreclose on the property in about 1914. Father Grange, who was the parish priest at San Albino, he then moves into the property, and this becomes his home until his death in 1936. He is a very interesting character, and there will probably be a Taylor talk that takes place that's entirely his life. He comes to New Mexico out of France in the 1880s as a part of the LeMay invasion, and has a relatively decent relationship with his parishioners, which is very different from what you see a lot of French priests have during this time period. There's a lot of question as to why that is, and also what constitutes relatively decent relationship with his parishioners. But I'll talk about him more on another date. He wills his property after his death to Perla Aladib. Perla Aladib is a Mexican refugee from the Mexican Revolution who comes into Mesilla with her mother, Valentina. Father Grange takes Valentina and Perla in. Valentina becomes Father Grange's housekeeper. Perla then later is Father Grange's housekeeper. She marries Jacinto Aladib, a Persian immigrant actually. This is Jacinto and Perla in these photographs right here. Sometime in the 1930s, Jacinto leaves Perla and goes and has another family in Mexico. And this is what's actually really amazing, is the historic site has a connection and a relationship with the descendants of Jacinto's second family. So hopefully someday they can come share their story. I think that would be a very interesting story to share. But she gets Father Grange's property after Father Grange passes. She converts a lot of the rooms into tenantable apartments, and so some of the back rooms of the historic site look the way they do because of her. She sells the property to J. Paul and Mary Taylor in 1953. And it is at this point that we reach the Taylor family. As I mentioned previously, they began living in this home in 1953. They lived in the home for 70 years, which is incredibly remarkable. In the early 2000s, there began conversations about what do we do with this property. They made the decision to donate it to the state. There had been a few obstacles that would maybe stand in the way of you being able to donate a home to the state that had already been covered, as the home was already on the State Register for Cultural Properties, the National Register of Historic Places, and it was also a contributing and significant structure in both the Mesilla Historic District and the Mesilla Plaza's National Register for Historic Places. So that took care of a lot of some of the difficulties that you might have with that. In 2003, a formal donation agreement was signed, and then in 2004, the site was dedicated officially as the Taylor-Mesilla Reynolds Mesilla State Monument. Which brings me to what the state is doing to open the site as a whole. We have been working in tandem with the Taylor family for the last 2 decades to do facilities work, construction work, inventorying and accessioning the collection, and then preparing the site with interpretive plans for tours and programs. I have to talk about this picture just a little bit. This is Oscar and Jerry. They're 2 members of our team. And when I was trying to figure out for this presentation what's a good photograph to transition from the history into what we're doing, I thought, I'm going to go get a picture of them at work. And I went in and I said, I want to get a picture of you guys in the middle of work, and this is what they did. Which is very adorable. They're both very sweet men, so it's great. But they're not actually at work, they're posing for the camera. One of the other things that we were able to get recently was additional money from the state to increase the operation budget. This means that we were able to add to our staff, which is really needed and fantastic. There are actually some other members of our staff in the building today, and I'm going to embarrass them by highlighting them out one by one. The site manager is right over there. Her name is Wendy Laws. We're really excited to have her. Next to Wendy is Emily Wilson. Emily is actually a new instructional coordinator up at Fort Selton Historic Site. That's really important because that means that I get to be here full time. So we're really excited she's here. And then right over here is Daniel Webb. He's our new interpretive ranger for the historic site. So these are all faces that you're going to get to know very well, and I am thrilled the pieces are here. And we actually have a few more staff that you'll be seeing coming on board in the coming weeks. So there's a lot of new faces, a lot of new people who will be helping to steer this ship forward. So what we're going to do now is we are going to shift to talk about some of the facilities upgrades that have happened. This is right here, what you're seeing on the screen is a project that took place back in May. This involved sanding and repainting the doors and windows at the historic site. And so essentially what they did is they sanded all of the old paint off, they scraped the windows to make them nice and shiny, and then they gave all of the wood features a brand new paint of coat. Paint of coat? That's not coat, right? Well, that's what I meant. It's all right. The other thing that they did is they removed all of the rotting wood from the site. And so this is all really important preservation work because what this does is it ensures that dirt, rain, the wind can't penetrate the building as easily. And then the new coats of paint, what they also do is they protect the wood from the sun eating at it. Another thing that happened at the same time was that we flipped a couple of the exterior doors. If you've been to visit this historic site before it became the historic site, this is probably a door that you've entered in several times. And if you remember, this door opened by pushing it. It swung inward. And this, because it is now a public building as opposed to being a private residence, there are some code requirements that we have to fulfill to make it a safe place for the public to come into. One of those things is that exterior doors have to swing out. And so this door now, you pull on it and it swings outward in order to enter the building. It was very weird the first time the door swung out for me. I was not used to that at all. But there are a number of various code compliances that we have to fulfill in order to open it as a public building. This includes exit signs, fire extinguishers, updated fire security system, updated electricity, updated security system. We also need CCTV cameras in place because that protects the building, it protects you as the visitors inside the building, but it also serves to protect the remarkable collection that's inside the building. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the collection itself, but I do want to explain to you what we are doing with that collection right now. One really key important detail to understand is that New Mexico Historic Sites as an entity is not a collecting division. So probably a little bit of a confusing statement, but what that means is that the Taylor family collection is actually managed by the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe. The collection's not going anywhere. It is staying right here in Mesilla, but all of the historic sites have a matching museum that they're tied to in Santa Fe that's a part of the Museum of New Mexico system that manages their collection. So this is just how all of the historic sites work. From the collection, these pieces that are high value pieces that are going to need some serious conservation work on them, they have been packed up by both the MOIFA staff and our New Mexico Historic Site staff, and they have been taken to the Farm and Ranch Museum across town for safekeeping during this process. And you can see in this photograph here some of that work that was done in order to make that happen. For the objects that are still in the home, we have contracted a really phenomenal art handling company named Level Fine. They have worked with the Department of Cultural Affairs for 15 years. They're very good at very quickly and safely deinstalling and reinstalling exhibits. And so they come down to Mesilla on a regular basis, and they'll help us track and label and pack all of the objects for rooms that are having construction work done in them. And then once that construction work is done, they will come back and help us rehang everything securely, with the intention that, of course, the Taylor House is essentially going to become a long-term permanent exhibit. So we want to make sure all of those pieces are cared for appropriately and safely. So turning from more of the behind-the-scenes work that we've been doing into the work that you are very soon going to be seeing yourselves, we are opening the first part of the museum on August 24th. It's so close, so soon right now. It is this portion of the historic site that you see in this photograph. We call this the Reynolds store. This is, of course, a part of both the Reynolds and Briggs Company, and then later Charles Reynolds' company when he reopened his father's mercantile, the Joseph Reynolds Company. But he is also responsible for this facade again, so that's why we are going to call it the Reynolds store. We are opening this building on August 24th. This used to be where Heart of the Desert was, if you're not sure kind of aiming where you are on the plaza. Heart of the Desert does have a new place located just off the plaza, so you should definitely go check them out because they are still here in Mesilla. This space is essentially going to be the welcome center, the visitor center, and this is where you would get your admission to go into the home once the home is open. But this is actually a really cool picture. So if you remember when Heart of the Desert was in the building, they had all of the things that they were selling, and it was such a full place. This is right after they moved out of the building. It looks so different, so empty. But this building is going to be really important to the historic site because this is really where we're going to get to introduce what is Mesilla, what is the history of the Mesilla Valley and southern New Mexico. So this is the place where you're going to be able to see interactive exhibits, more traditional museum exhibits. There will be objects and cases in this location. And then this is also where our inaugural exhibit will be opening on August 24th. Called Mesilla, a place of growth and change. And that exhibit is going to introduce the community of Mesilla to you through the lens of the Taylor family. We're very excited about that. The other thing is that on that date, we are having a big blowout event with it, which is very exciting. So from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., we're having the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site Family Day. August 24th does in fact mark what would have been J. Paul Taylor's 104th birthday, so it is very exciting that we get to have it on that day. We are going to have mariachi dancers, line dancers, ballet folklorico. It's going to be really exciting. We've also got the little kids from the J. Paul Taylor Academy. They're going to come do La Marcha. This is something that they used to do for Mr. Taylor every year. Mr. Taylor would go to the J. Paul Taylor Academy and the kinder, first, and second graders would dance La Marcha. This is a really wonderful school that highlights and continues to press forward these traditions of New Mexico. And so we want to continue those traditions. We want the kids to be able to learn their own history. So they're going to come do the dance on the plaza for all of us, which is really, really wonderful. There will also be a lot of community partners on site that day. The city museums, the university museums, Visit Las Cruces, some of our DCA partners, local Mesilla history and culture people that will have fun, interactive activities on the plaza from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mesilla Place of Growth and Change is just the first portion of the historic site to open. Again, as I already mentioned, we will have a lot of interactive exhibits, places where you can learn a whole bunch of different things. We will be rotating exhibits quite frequently because the story is way too big for us to just put one exhibit in the place and then be done with it. So we're going to continue to tell a various number of different stories. This is also where we need your help, because part of the mandate, both to us as historic site staff, but also from the Taylor family, is that this is your museum. This is a place where you get to tell the history of Mesilla. What is your family's Mesilla and Mesilla Valley history? And so one of the ways with which we are going to do that is through the Story Vault. Now, this is not actually the Story Vault. This is, in fact, a vault that is located in the Reynolds store. It's pretty awesome, but for safety reasons, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to let anybody in it. But it's inspired this concept that we are looking to put forth on the Story Vault. So we had a really wonderful intern over the last several months who did over 20 oral histories with people of Mesilla and people from the Mesilla Valley. There's a few of you in the building today who got to sit down with her. And those stories are going to be in the museum. And we want your story to be in the museum as well. And so what this Story Vault will do is it will be a place where you can come listen to those stories and you can come read about people's personal experiences with Mesilla. And then, because I know sometimes it's a little daunting to have to sit in front of somebody and tell them your entire life story, you'll be able to give your own story yourself. And so this was just one of the amazing interpretive things that we hope to be able to do with the historic site going forward. So I do just want to point out again that we have this really great opportunity as a historic site to be able to showcase southern New Mexico history that just gets ignored a lot. And so, New Mexico is really remarkable. It just is. It's got an incredible history. And I think it's important that we be able to say, we're here too, our history is just as important as well. And so this is something that we are really intentional in every step that we take with getting this historic site to be open. The last thing that I want to point out before I finish is that we need to be really thankful to the Taylor family for this incredible gift that they have given us. This is not something that we would have been able to do without them giving us their home and the collection inside. They're a really remarkable family, and this would not have been possible if Paul and Mary and their family did not recognize that this could be a really great opportunity for the people of New Mexico. So thank you to the Taylor family. I know they're but I hope this tells you just a little bit. It's a starter. I realize there's so much more we have to cover, but just tells you a little bit about what the point of this historic site is going to be. I'm throwing a lot at you, and I appreciate you bearing with me, but now I want to know if anybody has any questions for me.
How are people going to get into the actual house itself? Is it going to be through the store, or is it going to be...
Yeah, so his question was, how are people going to actually get into the home itself? It will be through the store. So there is a door in the Reynolds store that leads to the historic site itself. So that's how people will enter the home.
Will your items be reinstalled the same way as the
Yeah, as best as we can. The question was, will the collection be reinstalled as the Taylors had it? Yes. The idea, and this is something I probably should have mentioned earlier, the idea that the Taylors had was that the house would look like a lived-in home. So if you've been in the home before, you know what that home looked like. We are going to do our absolute best to put it back as close as we can to what it was before. Yes.
And will you still be doing the nacimientos?
Another really good question. Yes, we will still be doing the nacimientos at Christmas. That is a part of the donation agreement, so we will be doing nacimientos yearly. Yes. Any other questions?
In proximity is the house with the store.
They're right next door to each other.
Right next door, to the right?
Yeah, so this right here, this is a really good question. I probably should have pointed this out earlier. So right here we've got the Reynolds store. This is what we call the Zaguan door entrance to the historic site. So this is actually a hallway that leads behind. The home itself is located directly behind both of these storefronts. And so if you were going to this hallway right here, you kind of go past the stores, you would get into the house itself. And so from both storefronts, there's a doorway that goes to that hallway that goes back to the house. I think you had a question as well?
What are you looking at for potential emission peaks?
Don't know the answer to that question. Any other questions anybody has?
So maybe you could, for the folks that maybe haven't been back in there, just some sense of the scale of the property.
It is a 9,000 square foot property in total. The home itself is about 6,000 square feet. Yeah, there are 14 rooms in the home. It's a big house. Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Friends of the Taylor-Mesilla Historic Site?
I would love to. Yes, thank you, Bob. Bob is the vice president of the Historic Site, putting out important details. So we do have a Friends group. We've got a number of the Friends members who are here. Bob's vice president, Heather's our president, she's right back here. We have a number of people in the building today that are a part of that. They are our partners in this process, and they are, actually, it might even be better for you guys to explain what you do, because I will probably butcher it, but they are here to support us in programming, in marketing, in education, in fundraising. They were actually really, really helpful to us as an entity when it comes to getting money from the state this last year in order to be able to successfully do the project. Do you want to explain any more as to what the Friends are, Bob? Not to put you on the spot, but...
I would just say there are volunteer opportunities. Yes, that we are looking for volunteers to work things like the nacimientos and the other activities that have happened in the past. And so we are hopeful you'll come out on the 24th. We'll have a booth there. You can sign up. You can also tell us how to sign up for the Friends.
I will say, I gave Diane a bunch of volunteer handouts today, so.
There's a clipboard. Jan in the front row had a clipboard that we have a stack of forms on them.
Yeah, so if you do want to volunteer, we've got it in the building.
Back here on the table, or like Bob said, it'll also be available on the 24th, and anytime we see you, we'll probably bring a snack. So
We have
lots of opportunities.
We have some exciting plans for how to promote the site and to make it more accessible to people. We're looking at a volunteer gift store, which will turn into an actual gift store at some point, and other opportunities where you could be involved. And this is a community thing.
Yeah.
The Taylor family has been so generous to make this possible for us, and so thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions? Yes, that's a good call. So the comment was that there might be people who don't know what the Nacimiento Open House is, which is a very, very good point. The Nacimiento Open House is an open house that has happened for years and years at Christmas. The Taylor family had a really phenomenal collection of Nacimientos, nativity scenes. There are over 200 nativity scenes in this collection from all over the world. And so that is a part of the donation agreement that we will put them out. It might look a little different this year, but we are intending to have it every year. They are all throughout the house. There are a number of those nativity scenes that are actually on display all year round. But at the Christmas season, we do put those all out for everybody to be able to see and to come in and see the site. Thank you for pointing that out, yes. I think, yes.
Where'd you get your belt?
Taller.
Sorry, I love it.
Yeah. I think I saw another hand over somewhere. Yes.
Question.
Yeah.
First question, are they going to restore the front of that building, or is that the way it's going to look?
That's the way it's going to look.
Another question is, did you see it? Hang out with Bob?
I live in Las Cruces.
Thank you.
Membership is very inexpensive in our
That's all I want.
Other questions? I'll be hanging around if you prefer to just ask me that question privately. And again, anybody wearing a tag, you can, I'm just going to put y'all on the spot. You can ask them questions too. Thank you so much for coming to this first ever Taylor Talk. I